If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, all things have become new. That's the way I learned that Bible verse back when I was in 8th grade in confirmation class. We had 57 kids in the confirmation class, and all of us were tested on about 20 Bible verses that we were expected to memorize. But what an important verse that has been for me, and what an important verse it is for all of us. If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. See, everything has become new. St. Paul, when he wrote those words to the Corinthians, was speaking theologically, but not theoretically. What I mean by that is that the Apostle Paul understood this phenomenon from his own personal experience. For he himself had gone through an experience in which his life was completely transformed, almost in a flash of light on that road to Damascus, when he met the risen Christ and he heard Jesus calling to him. His life was changed from that moment on. And when the Apostle Paul went and was baptized into Christ, he became a new creation. The old passed away. Everything became new. In fact, from that moment on, his life was totally changed. Never again would he be doing the kinds of things that he had done before, and he would be a faithful servant of Jesus Christ to the very day that he died. If anyone is in Christ, he's a new creation. The old passes away. Behold, the new has come. For many Christians, of course, that kind of conversion experience, as Paul experienced on the road to Damascus, is seen as kind of the template or the model or the example of what every Christian must experience in order to be able to call themselves Christians. Especially among certain groups of Christians, that is a requirement, one might say, to have that kind of born-again experience. I remember the story of a pastor who was walking on a street in Manhattan, and as he was going down the street, he saw down on the far corner, there was a man with a Bible, and he's waving the Bible, and he's talking to all the people who are passing by. And finally, when the pastor got close to him, the man with the Bible saw him, and he shouted out, "Are you saved, brother?" Scared the hell out of him, really. And his response was, "I have been saved, I am saved, and I will be saved. Good day." And he journeyed on. Nevertheless, there are some people who insist on having that kind of conversion experience in order to call yourself a Christian. And indeed, that kind of experience is probably very much necessary in our current generation. For we're living in a generation where we have a lot of adults walking around who have never been baptized, who have never had any experience at all with the Church of Jesus Christ. It's hard for us as church members to imagine that, but there are many people, when they're asked in surveys, "What religion do you have?" they say, "None." And so the nuns are the growing religion in our country today. Now, N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S. The largest religious movement in our country today. People who claim no religious connection whatsoever for their lives. What a tragedy that is. Raised by parents who insisted that, well, I'm not going to give any religion to my child. I'll let them grow up and become a full-grown adult, and then they can choose for themselves. Which is a wonderfully liberal kind of an attitude. But spiritually, it's a very disastrous way of thinking for people. And so there are people today who are wandering around without any sense of faith or connection with God, who probably have a healthy sense of fear, anxiety, maybe even guilt, but they don't know where to go, where to find an answer to their questions. I think of, there have been many occasions, especially in recent years, where when we're having a service here in the church, like a special service like a funeral or even a wedding, that there are people who come in here and they'll say to me, "You know, I've never walked inside a church before in my whole life. hard for me to imagine, you know. 'Cause I feel like sometimes I live here. But there are some people who have never walked through the doors of a church, ever in their lives, who need to experience the presence and the power of God, because they are missing something in their lives. St. Augustine put it this way. He said, "You have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until we find our rest in you." And that is exactly what people are beginning to experience by the grace of God. Somewhere along the line, perhaps, the seed of the gospel was planted in their lives. And as in the parable today, where the farmer plants the seed and then goes away and it grows up and it sprouts and becomes the greatest of all things. This is a kind of phenomenon that we see sometimes in the lives of people as they are brought into fellowship with God in the life of the church. Often in a very sudden, very dramatic way. More often, however, for those of us especially who are in the church, the experience of conversion is a much more gradual, much more gentle process. It takes place over a long period of time as our parents keep the promises that they made when they brought us to be baptized, and then as we are surrounded by the love of members of the congregation, by Sunday school teachers and vacation Bible school teachers and helpers, and by pastors and lay people who care about them. And we grow up in the faith, learning to walk by faith, not by sight. That's not to say that the progression by which people grow up in Christ is a nice, neat progression like that. It often has its ups and downs. And there are times, perhaps, when people raised in the church will just stray away from the church and take a vacation from the church, so to speak, and lose touch with God. But God never gives up on them. And they always know where to go to find home. Well, regardless of whether our experience with God is one of a dramatic conversion experience, such as the Apostle Paul had, or a much more gradual experience, the outcome needs to be the same. We grow in faith, and we walk by faith, not by sight, living in God's new creation, living on this side of the resurrection of Christ with hope and with joy, and sharing in love with God's people and with our neighbor and with the world. That's the way God intended it to be. God's new creation is coming into existence continually. And that's why we're here, to help it along, to use the gifts that God has given to us to share that new life, that new creation with everyone we meet. Sometimes that new creation life is very subtle and very hard to perceive, but other times it becomes very visible and very dramatic. I read a story written by Henry Brinton about Nelson Mandela. I'm sure you know the name. Nelson Mandela was an advocate of the rights of black people in South Africa, a nation in which 80% of the population were African and only 20% were white. And yet the white oppressed the blacks in that country and controlled their entire lives. Nelson Mandela wound up in prison because of his strong protests against the things that were going on in that culture. And in 1974, they put him in jail. And he suffered greatly while he was a prisoner. Until 1990, when finally he was set free and allowed to live as a citizen of his country. Well, as the story goes, he became president of South Africa, elected overwhelmingly by the population of South Africa. And it was his opportunity, you might say, to work things out with the population that had been so oppressive all the years. 1995, the World Rugby Cup tournament was being held in South Africa. They were the host nation for that event. Kind of like right now where Canada is a host nation for the Women's World Cup of soccer. And rugby teams from all around the world were coming to South Africa to participate in this tournament. But rugby was a white man's sport. A white man's sport. And every member of the South African rugby team was white. And their emblem was that of a springbok, which was a leaping gazelle, which historically had been connected with the white oppression of black people in that country. The day came when Nelson Mandela called a press conference. And he got up, he went into that press conference, and he was wearing a cap. And on the cap was the symbol of the springbok of the rugby team. And he said to the press there that day, "We've got to support these. These are our boys. We've got to get behind them and support them now." Well, the coach of the rugby team was so overwhelmed by that experience that he took the entire team and brought them to the prison where Nelson Mandela had been a prisoner for 27 years. And he showed them the cell in which Nelson Mandela had suffered all those years. And he said to the team, "He suffered here because of the oppression of white people over black. But now he's there for us. We must not let him down." The team played in that tournament, and they got into the final game of the tournament. And during the halftime of the game, Nelson Mandela, who was at the game, went down onto the field and brought a children's choir with him. He was wearing a jersey with the springbok on the shirt as an emblem. And he led that children's choir in singing a black miner's song. And 65,000 people joined in the chorus that day. Well, you know how the story goes. South African team won the Rugby World Cup that day. And that night, for the next 24 hours, blacks and whites in South Africa danced and sang and celebrated together because something new had taken place in their midst. That's but an example or a glimpse of what the new creation is all about. God is doing something new in our world. We may be overwhelmed by so much of the evil and sin and painful suffering of people in our world, but we need to hear this word from God. If anyone is in Christ, there is a new creation. The old is passing away. Behold, everything has become new in Christ.